My name is Daniel Lewis Freedman. I was born May 14th, 1919 in Dorchester on Harvard Street, and I was the first of two children. And as things turned out, years later I went to the school right next door there, even though we moved away. And I went to local schools, and then when I went to high school, I went into Boston to high school, and it was an all-boys school. I graduated from there in 1936. Then I went out and got a job and worked at it until I was drafted into the Army.
What was the date that you were drafted into the Army?
I was drafted into the Army in March 1940.
March 1940.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your earliest childhood memory?
It depends on what age.
Yeah, well, I mean, what's the first thing you remember from your childhood?
I don't know.
I remember the first thing I remember was Julie being born.
Yeah?
Yeah.
No, I really don't have a lot of memories from my early years.
Well, were you 10 years old, 12 years old? You must remember something. I remember you telling me about how you used to do experiments, watching water come closer together and move faster. You had a little notebook and you took stuff down. You remember that? Yeah. Do you remember trying to fly when you were a kid?
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to tell that story?
And then I got an idea that I'd like to be able to fly. So we had a big storage chest out in the backyard where they kept the barrels of refuse. And I got up on top and I spread my arms out and I jumped off and expected to fly across the backyard. But instead, I landed right on my hands and face.
How old were you when you did that?
And I was probably in the 5th grade.
Mm-hmm.
So I was probably around 10 or 11 years old.
Yeah.
And then in the 6th grade, my teacher, Mr. Levis, was a golfer, and he said to me, "You could come up to the golf course and be a caddy and make some money." So he took me up and introduced me to the golf course and to the caddy master, and I got a number and I became a caddy. And I worked there for 2 years, I think, and I would use the money, extra money. I was a lover of milk, so I would buy extra milk on the way home to take to the house. And met some interesting people on the golf course.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I learned how to play golf and what it meant to people. And in later years, I did play golf.
Oh, yeah? When did you play golf?
Oh, I played golf regularly and at the local golf courses until one day, a Saturday, and we were living in Magnolia, and I was going to play golf again that day, and Mom said, "You know, I'm home with the children all week, and you leave and go away on Saturday, so I don't have any free time." I said, "Okay, I won't play golf on Saturday."
Mm-hmm.
I gave it up.
Uh-oh.
I did play after that, but on Wednesday afternoons.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't a good golfer, just an average golfer, but I enjoyed being out on the golf course.
Mm-hmm. Well, what can you tell me about your mom and dad and your sister, or any of your other relatives from when you were young?
Well, my father worked nights, so he sometimes would sleep during the day, and but he was interested in news and whatever was going on, so he got a radio, which was one of the first radios that we ever heard of, and he would listen to the news. And he was also a sports enthusiast. Uh, he went to high school in Boston. He was on the track team and won a couple of medals in races. And he loved baseball, and he would try to go to as many baseball games as he could. In those days, there was the Boston Braves as well as the Boston Red Sox. So the Braves were on weekends, so he would try to go to a Boston Braves game on a weekend. And so he would take me, and we would go out to lunch and go to the ball game.
And was your dad, was he a big athlete? Was he a strong man or a big man?
Well, I wouldn't say he was an athlete. He was a runner in the races from his high school, but he didn't participate in any sports. He would go and enjoy seeing sports.
What was the story about his losing his eyesight? How old was he when that happened?
He was working in theater. He worked setting up the scenery, and something fell and hit him and caused him to lose sight in one eye. So he had to have been probably in his 40s, I'd say. And then as time went on, he began to lose sight in his right eye.
Uh-huh.
And he wasn't completely blind, but he could just about make himself get around.
And was that his partial sight lasted for a long time, or did he go totally blind at one point? How old was he when he lost sight in the other eye?
Well, during the war, he couldn't work at the job he had, so he got a job with the newspaper, selling newspapers at night. And I don't know how he did it, but he would go on the T all the way out to Everett, and had a spot there they get assigned to him, and he would sell his newspapers there. So he had to bring home some money to live on. And in those days, during the Depression, he did get a bit of money from the union he belonged to in the theater, but it was only maybe $25 a week, which wasn't a lot of money. And all the time I was in the service, that's just about what he lived on, other than what I was able to send him. So,
So he was in the theater union, IATSE or something like that.
He was in the theater union, yeah.
Yeah. So had he done that for a long time before he got injured?
Yeah, he had. That's where he worked. That was his job. Yeah.
How did he? I didn't realize that. How did he get into that work?
I don't know how he got into it.
But he was doing that ever since you were a kid.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh. And there was
And
a lot of theater in Boston going on.
Yeah, he would buy us tickets to the shows. My mother and my sister and myself, we'd sit up in the second balcony, and we'd see a lot of shows, see musicals. We didn't buy us tickets other than musicals that we could enjoy.
And your sister was how much younger than you?
My sister was about 3 years younger than me.
Mm-hmm. And were you guys very close?
And we were very close. And we, and so we were so close that while I was away in the service, and she found someone she wanted to marry, I said, I hate to see you get married. Why don't you wait till I come home before you make a decision? But she didn't want to lose him as a husband, so she married him while I was in the service.
How come he wasn't involved with the war?
He he was in the Navy,
Uh-huh.
and she met him in Boston, and so he was involved. Yes.
Yeah.
And then after they got married, they moved to California, where he came from, and they lived close to his parents.
Uh-huh. Just wait for
And
that siren to go by
yeah,
because I
then
can't.
they had 2 children, a girl and a boy.
Uh-huh. And what else can you tell me about your family before your father was? Did you know anyone else that earlier where they came from and stuff like that?
Well, at one time when things were pretty good, we lived in a very nice 3rd floor apartment in a new building, and with a big porch, and had things were very good. But when the Depression really hit, and there was hardly any work, we had to go somewhere to live. So we moved in with Mom's grandparents, Mom's parents,
Mm-hmm.
Mom's parents, and they afforded us a room and meals and care, and they were very nice. And my grandfather was in the construction business, and he had a whole team of workers, and he had a horse and team, and he would take me for a ride with him on the horse and team. And at that time, I had just started kindergarten. That's how early that was. And it was at the Gleason School. And
You're kidding me? The Gleason School. I went to a Gleason School, but your Gleason School was in Dorchester or Boston?
yeah, Dorchester, yeah.
Uh-huh. And so your grandfather had his own company.
Yeah, he had his own company.
So then your mother was from that's kind of well-to-do or something.
Well, moderate means, yeah. And they had a nice house. And also, we had 2 brothers that were living there. And my grandmother's mother was living there. The house was full. And she was a sick lady up in the 3rd floor, and she passed away while I was living there.
How old were you when she passed away?
I was in kindergarten, so I was probably 8 years old. And so there were 3 sons living there. One of them, he passed away while I was there. But one of them, the youngest one, he went on to go to school and college and become a lawyer. And the other one went into the shoe business and had help. I think he had a plant that he worked at that they made shoes. He did pretty well. In my father's family, they were in the furniture business. They had a couple of places or stores that they worked at.
And why didn't your father go into that business?
Well, I guess they didn't invite him into the business. So
You have a lot of brothers and sisters?
he had 1 sister and I think 3 brothers. 1 brother was in the insurance business, and 2 of them were in the furniture business. The one in the insurance business, he had offered, when I got out of the service, to have me come and learn the insurance business. He lived in Worcester. But I remember my grandfather was a strong, powerful man, and he would take a handful of nuts and he could just crack them. And we had celebrated the Jewish holidays. And my grandmother, she made wine, and she had pickles. She made pickles. And she would bake bread, and she had a big feather arm, a wing, and she would dip it in the butter and spread it on the bread. I remember that in particular. And it was a duplex house, and we had the neighbors next door. One of my uncles there, he married a girl that lived next door.
And your grandfather, was he from the old country?
And he came from Hungary, and my grandmother came from Russia. Where they met, I don't know.
So they met before they came here?
I think so. And my grandmother, we'd take after her. She used to buy dishes, and she had a room full of collectibles, and she had a piano in there that my younger uncle used to play. And she had barrels of dishes. She just collected a lot, because in those days people would bring those things, but they wouldn't keep them. They'd throw them out. So she would pick them up.
Mm-hmm. And so do you know anything more about the old country or anything? Did they ever tell stories about the old country? This is your father's parents.
No, this is my mother's parents.
Uh-huh.
No, not really. It never told us any stories.
The thing I should have said in the beginning is when I ask a question, if I say, did your grandfather do this, instead of saying, yeah, he did this, say, you have to repeat the question and the answer, because my voice will be cut out. So, if you can remember to do that. But the thing I'm curious about, you said the grandfather that could crack nuts, that was your father's father?
My mother's father.
He was a big, powerful man?
Big, powerful man, yeah.
Yeah, and the mother's brother that became a lawyer, didn't he do something for you later in the army?
Yes, he he married a very nice woman who was a second cousin, and they moved to Washington. And he got involved with the Marriott family. When they first started in business, they had restaurants, and he was their lawyer. And in the book that they would, softcover book they would put out in the hotel for people to read, it would mention him as their lawyer as when they started in business. He was in the National Guard, and so when war was declared, he was recruited and became a general. He was a general, and he was, I guess, in the department that had to do with law and order. So it was quite influential. So when I was selected to go to OCS, I went to visit him, and he was very nice. He told me where to go for dances and things were going on for the men in uniform. And so one day he said to me, where would you like to go when you graduate? I don't think you should be sent overseas. You spent almost 3 years overseas. So I said, well, I don't want to go back to Boston, but I want to go back to a place where I'll be close enough. I want to visit in Boston. So he sent me to Schenectady, where I spent the rest of my time in the service.
These people are making a bunch of noise. Can't hear you. Okay. So anyways, you were saying about Schenectady?
Yeah. So in Schenectady, my colonel liked the idea that I was, I think, maybe only the one who had been overseas. And he would take me with him and have me tell stories of events, or whatever things had taken place when I was overseas. And so then he had me promoted to a first lieutenant. And when it came time when I had enough points to get out and I was going to be discharged, he asked me to stay on. He'd make me a captain. But I was anxious to get back into the world, so I declined and took the chance and got discharged. And I was in the reserves. But there were a nice group of soldiers, officers, and we would go to the horse races and the wax there. They were friendly, and not that we got too friendly with them. They were just friendly, and they had cars. Some of them they would provide transportation and go different places.
Let me stop for a second again. Let's jump back a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your school experience in high school and what kind of grades you did, how you did in school, and that type of
Oh,
stuff.
high school, I was on the track team. I was on the 50-yard dash. I was in the school races, and in the final competitive races, I came in second in the 50-yard dash, so I earned my letter. And I was a good student. I was even selected to try to become an officer in the graduating class, but I didn't get enough votes. But I did make speeches and try to be nominated. I was nominated, but tried to win the election.
Huh. And what kind of grades did you get in high school?
I had almost straight A's, except in my senior year. I had one teacher that didn't like me, and no matter what I did, I couldn't get better than a B. And I spoke to him and asked him to give me something extra to do to see if I could bring up the grade. I was so anxious, but he wouldn't do anything for me.
Why do you think he didn't like you?
I don't know.
Are you saying that 4 years in high school, was it 4 years in high school back then?
3.
3 years in high school?
Yeah, I was in junior high school. They have a junior high school, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. Then you go to regular high school for 3 years.
In the 3 years in high school, you have 3 quarters a year, so that's 9 quarters. 4 courses a quarter?
3 months is a quarter.
No, 4 courses in each quarter?
Why, I
Don't remember, but so probably 36 courses. Out of 36 courses, you got 35 A's and 1 B?
Yeah.
So could you just say that the whole way through high school, every class you had an A except for 1 class?
And I was selected to take a test for an awards, but there was some fellows smarter than me, and they won the awards. But at least I was selected for them.
But could you just say for the camera that all the way through high school there was only 1 course that you got a B and everything else was an A?
Yeah.
Just say that.
That's pretty good.
Yes, I went through high school and I got all A's except for 1 B.
What was the B in?
History.
Yeah. Well, and then what about
I
junior?
got A's in mathematics. I was a good math student, chemistry student.
You're an A.
Yeah. And so, what about junior high? What kind of grades did you get in junior high?
Oh, junior high, I was a top student. I don't remember if I got all A's and B's. I'm sure I got all A's and B's. I never got anything less than that. And I was always very good in math. Always got an A in math.
And were you, what were your interests early on, like starting junior high through high school? What other interests did you have besides studying?
I was interested in going to MIT, and somehow I got interested in metallurgy. I got to take up courses in metallurgy, but that didn't happen.
Sounds pretty good to me.
So I went looking for a job. So I went to the school committee. They had a placement bureau, and they offered me 2 or 3 jobs. One was to be a clerk in the bank, and the other one was to be in the meat business, a meat cutter, and that's a trade. And it was my feeling that I'd do better with a trade than I would with being a clerk, because with a trade you would always make a living. In those days, it was in 1936 and 37, during the Depression, I knew I could get work, so that's what I selected. So they sent me to the economy grocery stores, where I worked behind the counter with Ben Onigman, who was the manager, and he taught me the things that I had to know to wait on customers, and how to prepare things for the case. And then he was, it was $7 a week, I think. And finally I got a promotion to $9 a week. And then,
For how many hours?
well, the regular store hours, they were probably,
Slave labor.
yeah,
That
Let him talk.
Those
You're going to talk
times.
next month.
I think it was probably from 9 in the morning till 6 in the afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
So then they needed extra help. They were opening Stop and Shop. So they selected me to go work on the meat departments.
Mm-hmm.
So I worked in a few meat departments, and then they had open stores in Worcester called Rood and Woodbury. So they sent me out to Worcester to work out there.
Yeah, and so you worked at that until you got into the Army?
Yeah.
So then what
I know.
happened?
I worked at that until Ben Onigman had an uncle who owned a block of stores in Winchester, and he wanted Ben to open a market there. So he did, and he took me to manage the meat department, and I was going to get $25 a week
Wow.
from $9. So I went to work for him, and I managed the meat department by myself. And people would come in, and with the name Danny, the prejudice in Winchester, they thought I was other than Jewish. So they would come and they would patronize the meat department. And one day a woman came in, she said to me, "I'm not going to smoke Camels anymore. Eddie Cantor was on TV advertising Camels. He's a Jew. I wouldn't smoke Camels anymore." What am I going to say to her?
what did they do?
Because he was Jewish, she wouldn't smoke Camel cigarettes that he was
So-
advertising.
Back then, Winchester was a very wealthy town.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they used to drive up in a chauffeur-driven limousine, and they had no liquor stores, but liquor was delivered. There was
From SS
SS Pierce used to deliver liquor, and we would deliver a lot of tonic, ginger ale, and they would want for their liquor.
Yeah. And where did you live when you were working in Winchester?
I worked in I lived in Dorchester,
Mm-hmm.
and I would go to work with Ben early in the morning. We'd go into the market and buy what we needed and go out to Winchester. So it was a pretty long day, and Saturdays was a real long day. But I made enough money, so I bought a car, and I could drive to Winchester without having to go through Boston and go to the market.
Can you jump back again to high school and talk about the friends that you hung out with and what you did, like going to the Orchard Beach and that kind of stuff?
Yes, there were 4 of us that chummed around together.
You have to say during high school.
Well, I would say it was after high school that we really got close. There was Arnold and Herman and Stewie. And it so happened that Arnold was related to Stewie, and Arnold was related to Herman, but Stewie was not related to them. And of course, I wasn't either. So we would go to dances, and Herman's father owned a lot of real estate. I think he owned almost the whole street in Roxbury. So Herman always had money, but he would spend it on us. We'd go to the G&G deli, he'd buy all the corned beef sandwiches. And he worked in his brother-in-law's drugstore behind the counter, so we were able to come and have ice cream free whenever. And so we were dating, and we had some girlfriends, and we decided we'd like to go away, so we went to Old Orchard Beach. We rented a cottage, and we met girls up there too. There was one girl who was a very pretty girl, was a waitress, and she liked Arnold. So when the summer was over, she had a job down south. So she stopped by in Boston to visit with Arnold, and then she went on her way. But Arnold was also a good-natured fellow. And when I was drafted, March 15th, 1940, Arnold went with me and wanted to join at the same time. And I said, no, you can't do that. You have to be called upon to do that. So later on, he was drafted, and he got a job down south in the Air Force. He never left the United States. My outfit, they left in January 1941, right away.
So you want to talk about what happened starting March 15th, 1940? You got into the Army, you went to boot camp somewhere? What happened?
I got in at March 15th, 1940. I was sent down to Camp Edwards in the Cape. And what happened is, before that time, Stewie was going to Northeastern Nights, and he met a couple of fellows there who were in the National Guard, and they had been called into service. And so there was a party for them, and I went to the party, and I met them. And so when I was drafted and sent to Camp Edwards, one of them was interviewing the new recruits and assigning them to companies and whatever, and different parts of the service. Louis Fox, his name was. And he saw my background. He said, I'm going to put you in the quartermaster. It'd be better for you, not the infantry. So I got put in the quartermaster, which saved my life. I could have been killed in the infantry, who knows. So then my outfit was selected to go overseas, and I made up a whole new division. From the Yankee division, we were picked out to go and be the Americal division, Americans in Caledonia. So we left in January 1941, went through the Panama Canal all the way to Australia. Then we were in Australia for a while, and we were put up in tents outside the zoo, a big plot of land. So we had access to the zoo, and which was unusual because they had trained some of the animals there to perform, so they would have a circus performance once in a while. And I had a picture of a monkey riding a pony. And a little girl, she must have been 10 years old, came up to me and offered me a coin and said, "Welcome to Australia, Yank." And you could go in a store, you want to buy something, you couldn't pay for it. they wouldn't charge an American anything, ice cream or coffee or whatever. So I met a girl there, Allison Bertram, her name was, and we were friendly. And so when I was selected then to go to New Caledonia and we moved on, she came down to the boat with cookies she made for me. And we corresponded for a while. Finally, she married somebody from Washington, New York, and she lives in the United States. So that name, Allison, is unusual. So one day a waitress here said her name was Allison, and it brought back the whole memory of Allison Bertram.
Mm-hmm.
So we were in New Caledonia for a
How
while.
long were you in Australia?
We were in Australia probably about 3 months.
And what was the business that you were doing while you were in Australia? Were you training or something?
Australia, we were training and, doing the usual things that recruits have to learn. And we were told that we would be moving on because that's where we got our name for the division. So then we went to New Caledonia, and there had been a lot of Japanese people there. They rounded them all up and put them in concentration camps. And the houses they had is where they billeted us. We were in houses. So I was in a particular house, and across the street from me was a French couple. He was in the government there, and their son was fighting in Africa. And they had servants who lived downstairs. And the servants, we would hire them to come and clean our place. So they would come over and clean up for us. And she would invite us to dinner, just a couple of us, because one of them spoke, our friends, he spoke French fluently, and I knew a little bit, so we could correspond,
How did you know French?
I took French in high school for 4 years,
Oh, okay.
and I learned more there. So she was, every French woman there did something, created something, did something artistic. And she made that round
That wooden thing.
the round painted thing I have. I saw she had one and I admired it. So one day here I was up in Bougainville, up in the Solomon Islands, and I got a package. She sent it to me.
Wow.
Yeah,
You must have made quite an impression on her.
yeah,
for
we
her to
were
do that.
friendly.
Yeah. And then, so from New Caledonia, how long were you there?
We were there for a while, quite a while. And then from there, my captain asked me, he said, "Do you want to volunteer to go to Guadalcanal? I'll get you a promotion." I was a private. No, I was a corporal already. So I said, "Okay, I'll go." So that's how I got to Guadalcanal. We were the first Army troops in the Guadalcanal. And we were bombed and we had strafed, and fortunately we had dugouts we would get into and we were sort of protected. But there was a battle going on, and we would have shells in our area, but not too dangerous. Just I know one day we came back to my tent, and I was busy writing out requisitions for supplies. That was my job, to see that the troops got the proper supplies. Now we're in the tropics, they need different sort of clothing and whatever. Not only that, we got the rations. We'd come at night on ships. They'd dump them on the beach, and we'd have to get them all set up in a ration dump. So because of the fact that we still were in a danger zone, the officers kind of disappeared. They were hiding. So my major came to me and he said, Freedman, I want you to take charge of the ration dump. He said, I want you to make up the menus. I want you to divide up the food and see that the Army, the Navy, Marine Corps, and the Air Force all get supplies. So I had 4 fellows there, and they would make out the requisitions. And I would, I would tell them what to do and what to give them. And they would bring me pastry and cake. And to get extra rations, they gave me a 45. I had a Japanese camera they gave me. I mean, a lot of things to bribe me to give them different things.
So were you in charge of all the supplies and
All the
Guadalcanal?
food supplies, yeah.
Say that again.
I was in charge of the food distribution to the troops,
For the whole.
the whole island, yeah.
And how many people were there? How many?
I don't know. The Marines were there, and the Army was there, and the Air Force was there,
So you think
and the Air Corps.
20,000 people?
That's why I got promoted. I was a corporal. I became a staff sergeant, and then because of that, and I was written up in the Quartermaster magazine too. So when we got to Bougainville, and this was after we were in the Fijis, then we went to Bougainville, my major came in, or no, colonel came in, and he said, Freedman, I have a quota of 1 to go back to the United States Quartermaster School. He said, I'm sending you. And that's how I got sent back. My outfit went back up to the Philippines, and all the way up to Japan.
Oh, so your outfit was in the war to the very end.
To the end, yeah.
So you got out how much earlier?
Well, it was, I was there 3 months. It's almost a year.
Yeah, so.
Yeah.
And then, at what point did you get a Bronze Star? Talk about that.
That's why I got the Bronze Star. I was in Schenectady at the Army Service Depot, and the general called me in and he said, Freedman, because of the way you handled things in Guadalcanal, you were awarded the Bronze Star for outstanding performance.
You didn't run away.
And then, so after officer training school, then what happened?
I was sent to Schenectady, New York, as a second lieutenant, and I worked there in ration distribution and warehousing, and I was there until I decided to leave.
So do you think that all that experience in the Army kind of set you up for what you wound up doing with Dexter Beef?
No, I wouldn't say that. When I got out of the service, I went back into the meat business, but I went into the wholesale end because I didn't want to work 6 days a week. Wholesale was 5 days a week, and regular hours from 9 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. I didn't have to work those long hours. So while I was there, and I was learning the actual wholesale business,
Where were you? What was
in
your
Boston,
first job?
in Boston,
What was your
Sprague
first job?
Brothers Company.
Say, I talked over you. Say it again.
I
talked
was
over
in
you.
Boston.
Wait till I finish talking. Go ahead, say it.
I was in the Boston wholesale meat district with Sprague Brothers, and I worked there selling, distributing meat wholesale. And one day, Ralph Cohen, whose father-in-law had owned part of the business, had him come and work there. So we worked together. We're friends for a couple of years. And then we decided we ought to go in the wholesale business ourselves. So we left there and we decided to have routes. So he would take the South Shore and I would take the North Shore. And we would hire trucks. We were already living in Medford, right?
Yeah.
I had to go in town and get a truck, and take it over, have them put ice in it because it was not electric refrigerated, rented truck. Then I'd go back into Boston and get meat. Then I'd go out in the truck by myself, go to store and offer them wholesale meat delivery service. Well, these small independent stores, each one had to go into the market himself to get his things. This was great. I said, fine. Call us, we'll tell you what we want, you get it and bring it to us. So that's what I started. I got rid of that truck and we bought trucks that were refrigerated. And then one day
What was that year? What was the year you started with the ice truck, and then when did you change the trucks? What year was it?
What did he ask you?
Never mind, Ma.
I don't know.
Well, okay.
I was living on Ronley Road. I had Jane and Jimmy. So that had to be when Jimmy was about, he was born there, so that's
52 he was born?
52 years ago. So
Yeah.
1960, 1958.
Mm-hmm.
So I went door to door and built up customers. And then we decided we could use someone to help us. So we hired one person to ride with me on my busy day and the same guy to ride with Ralph on his busy day. Then we decided we could use our own place. So we bought a refrigerated place in Newmarket Square that just opened up. I'm trying to remember Seems to me we went to business in Faneuil Hall first and hired a place there and delivered from there to begin with. And they were building Newmarket Square and they were going to take all the meat business units out of Faneuil Hall and transfer them there. And so that's what we did. We had business there and had our trucks parked there and delivered from Boston, had the meat come to us, and we had to hire people to cut it up and prepare it for delivery. And then we moved to Newmarket Square after that. But
And then, so what happened from there?
so then we moved to Newmarket Square, and we had to hire more help. And then
Did you work at him?
we worked
Paul
out.
Miller's? Did you work
Oh,
out there?
well, when we first started and we had to leave, we worked out of Paul Miller. Yeah, he had a big refrigerated unit, so we had things stored there that we sold until we were able to buy our own place, which was across the street in another building.
Yeah, how about on the family side? How did that progress? Were you 27 when you met Ma? How old were you?
Yeah, I guess I was 27.
You were-
And how long had you been in business at that point in time?
Oh, I wasn't in business then. I was working. I didn't go into business until I was in my 30s. I was 35, I think.
Wow.
I worked in the meat market, and I was making $75 a week, which was enough for us to have a nice bed.
You were older than that.
Then what? Then when I went into business,
How old were you when John was born? He's 52.
Yeah, but he'd already been in business a long time when I was born.
Yeah.
He didn't start business. So,
I didn't go into business until I was in my 30s.
Yeah,
30,
in your 30s.
yeah, that's what he said.
Yeah.
He said 35, Ma.
Maybe I was 32,
But I was just asking when he
Yeah.
met Ma, was he 27? And he said, yeah, he was 27 when he met you. Tell that story.
Yeah, I was 27, and I took one look at her, and I just said, she is just what I'm looking for. And this was at Renee's. But I'd had an affair with a girl in Albany, New York, and we were very close. And it looked like we were going to get married. I came back to Boston, and she came to visit me. I wasn't too happy with her family, for one thing. Her mother was a little bit strange, and her father was a little bit different. But I liked her very much, and her family could offer me a different way of life because they were all in the clothing business, and she had an uncle who was a manufacturer.
Yeah.
So that's what happened when I came back to Boston. I was looking for work. I approached her, and she had me visit her uncle, one of her uncles, and he was a salesman on the road, and he had contacts. So he said, I can get you a job. You can handle Loreno Goodman trousers and travel with us and present your product when we go to see the buyers. And then you have to go on your own up through New England. So they took me with them, and I met some buyers, and finally I went out on my own in New England. I went as far as Bangor, Maine. But it was a lonely job,
Yeah.
and I wasn't a super salesman. I just didn't have the kind of push for that. So I gave it up and went back into the meat business. So when she came to visit, she didn't want to come and live in Boston. I didn't want to go live in Albany. Not only that, I think she wanted too much. I mean,
He was poor.
I was poor, and she didn't want a poor man. So she went back to Albany, and we stopped corresponding. So it was after that I met Mom, because I knew
You
Albany.
meet me before or after?
You met her after. Never met you before.
Oh,
How much after you broke up with that woman did you meet Ma?
Oh, it couldn't be too long. Maybe a year later. She
You
was
think you were still
visiting
upset
Renee,
about having-
and I knew Alvin because he was the accountant that came in there. And one day he asked me, I was still working. He asked me to come take her off his hands, and I thought she was the cutest thing. But she went back to New York, and I said, I've had a long distance romance. I visited her a few times. I can't do this, you know. But we managed to get together again, and I said,
your mother came to Boston. Said, well, let's see. My father said, I know you got somebody there. Said, where you going?
Yeah, she came to Boston. We got together again. So we decided we won't have a long romance. We made up our minds already. So we'll get married. So that's how we got married. So fast. Well, it wasn't really fast. How many months was it? 6 months?
What?
How long were we? No.
We met July 22nd, 1947.
Mm-hmm.
And we were married February 22nd, 1948. So that's not a long romance.
No.
No, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. It's
That's
7
it,
months.
Right there.
How many
Yeah.
times did you guys see each other in 7 months?
A few times.
A few times I would
Dad
drive to
drove back and
I
forth.
would drive to New York.
So maybe you saw her 5 times before you got married?
Or at least, huh?
Maybe.
Yeah, you spent a week together before you got married.
Huh?
Sounds like you spent a week together before you got married.
Well,
About a week. Anyway, so you got married and then you had a baby right away. Tell me what happened with moving into the first apartment and everything.
Oh,
we moved. My sister got us an apartment in Brighton, so we went up. The landlady said, "This is a wonderful apartment complex. I have lawyers and judges and doctors that living here."
you know the funny part of that is that Jeff and Colleen took that apartment in that building, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we got married. It
They
was
paid a fortune
yeah.
for it.
It wasn't a very nice apartment. The wall was slanted and small. And anyway, when the new apartments came available in Brighton, we went and got one of those, and we got a first floor apartment. And
And
Renee
it was right next door to Renee.
right next door to Renee. There were 2 streets of new apartments, and we got to know some of the people there, and that was very nice. And we had to sleep on the floor at first. We didn't have any furniture. Mom was pregnant. The doctor came to see her, and he says, "You have to sleep on the floor." I said, "That's all we can do for now."
Dad had an apartment, had an uncle who was in the furniture business. So that's where we ordered the sofa.
How long
was
after
right
you got
after
married?
the
How
war.
long after you get married did Ma get pregnant?
Oh no, I got pregnant right away
She got
on
pregnant
my
right-
honeymoon.
On our honeymoon.
So Jane was born 9 months after you were married.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so say that Jane was born 9 months after you
Yeah,
married.
Jane
Mike,
was born
this
9
is
months
his
after.
interview. We'll do your interview in a minute. Let him just finish. Tell about the story. This family, Dad.
So we got married 7 months after we met, and then we went on a honeymoon, and I got $300 from the government, so I used that, and we went
And
to
we went to Bermuda.
we went to Bermuda, and spent a week in Bermuda, or more.
Huh?
A week or more in Bermuda.
Yeah, we were supposed to have 2 weeks, but we gave it up because we sent the money to your sister for
Oh yeah, gave her some. of the-
fare.
Yeah, right. So she could come to Boston. So then we had that apartment, and I would go to work into Boston from there. And it was a nice area. It was a nice little apartment. And Mom made Jell-O one night. I couldn't believe. How do you make Jell-O so easy?
Okay, let me stop for a second. I just have to. Okay, so you from that apartment, then what happened? You were going to work from that apartment in Brighton. You were staying there, and then you got a house or something. What happened next? Tell me about when Jane was born.
Jane was born, we lived in Brighton.
Yes.
So we gave her the bedroom. And we slept on it.
So next door in the building that Renee was in was a couple, and her husband, Renee's husband Stan, worked with him, and his wife came from Medford, and she said, we have some nice apartments in Medford, we could all move out there. So she said, there's a duplex, you can have one half, we'll have the other, and there's another building, and Renee can be in the other building. So we all three moved out to Medford. I was familiar with Medford because I worked in Winchester. So, so we did that. And then they moved out, and somebody else moved in next door. But the landlord who lived in the next house was an Italian man who was a very nice man, he and his wife. And
he loved Jane.
He loved Jane, and he'd have her in the house playing his piano.
Yeah, I was
Julie,
born in Rome.
Wasn't Julie born?
Charlotte Bloomberg is still living.
Oh, if he was 6 months old, then Jane was born from Pine Ridge Road. Want to go away for summer vacation, so we went out and rented a place.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally,
Chirassi had a boy who was mentally handicapped. And she used to put him in a pool in the backyard right next to us.
Yeah, I used to make a racket.
So we had to get out of there for the summer anyhow.
So we went out and we rented a place, and then we looked around and saw the house was for sale. So we bought that.
Yeah, we were big on buying houses.
Big summer house, and we enjoyed living out there. And
Dad wanted to one time keep that house for our permanent.
Okay, go ahead, Ma. Tell me about when you were born and where
you
were
want
born.
to tell me?
Yeah.
I should tell you where I was born.
Tell me your life story, starting with you.
I was born in Harlem.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my grandparents lived. At that time, Harlem was pretty high class. And there was a hospital there, Beth David Hospital. And so my mother had a friend who worked there. So I was born there. It wasn't that far from where we lived in the Bronx. But my brother Artie loved the story because Harlem was for black people, and I was dark, and he was light. Mm-hmm. So he told the story that they gave Mom this baby, and she was black, and you know how Mom is, she loves everybody. So she took her, and now she's my sister. He was delightful.
You didn't get along that well with Artie.
But no, I mean, there was a big contrast because my dad was blonde and blue eyes, very fair, and my mother was dark.
Where was your dad's family from?
And my father's name was Light, and I realized later on, years later, that my mother's name was Brown. Mm-hmm. So she had brown hair and brown eyes, and he had blonde hair and blue eyes. And my brother looked like my father. Mm-hmm. And I guess I looked like the Brown family. Anyhow, I wasn't neglected. My mother had this very close friend. Their name was Zabbits. He was in the blouse business, and the two couples were quite friendly. And the two ladies were very handy. They used to make silk lampshades and all this kind of stuff. And we lived side by side in the Bronx, and she had just an only child who was Muriel, and she was dark too. And they were trying to match up Artie and Muriel. Anyhow, then years later, we moved to Brooklyn because my grandparents moved to Brooklyn.
Your mother's parents, your father's parents?
Oh, my mother's. My father's parents never got to this family. They never got out of Russia, Lithuania.
How did your father
That
get out?
that deaf girl that you met, my father brought her to this country. He was 17, and he took this 2-year-old because her mother had died in childbirth. His older brother, William, was the father, and he left his little girl with his parents in order to come to America and escape the Russian army and find a wife. So when he settled in the Philadelphia area, and my father's family, my father's life was very interesting, you know, if you retold it, because he came, you know, cold steerage in a big boat with this little girl. And he used to tell the stories that when he came to this country, they called him a greenhorn because he couldn't speak the language. And but he was pretty smart. He came here and he went to school in this country. And he took all the science course and everything. He wanted to be a doctor, but he couldn't afford it. He didn't have the funds. But he worked in Philadelphia near my uncle, I guess. My uncle eventually had a men's haberdashery store. And everyone liked my Uncle William. He was a very friendly man. So my father then met my mother at some family gathering or something. And they got married while he was in the service. And eventually he owned a department store in a small town in Pennsylvania. And he was in the 5th class or something, not to be drafted, because he didn't have good eyesight. He wore glasses. But in a small town, they took him anyhow in the service. And he was in the medical corps. And his job, they sent him overseas. And his job was picking up the bodies on the...
This is World War One.
Huh?
This is World War One.
In battlefield.
Yeah, say that it was World War One.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
World War One. He was in the last transport over. And so my mother was pregnant. We were good at that with my brother Artie. And she sold everything in that store and moved to New York to live with her family. Well, her family consisted of 5 boys and 3 girls. They all lived, 8 children. And she was next to the oldest, next to my Aunt Fanny. And she had that baby, and he was brought up in my grandmother's house. And I guess he wasn't, maybe he was almost 2 years old when my father came home. So meantime, he lives with all these uncles who, I guess, they must have been spoiling him good, and he was very smart. My Uncle Arthur used to take him down, so the story goes, take him down on Broadway and bet on him. Say, my nephew can guess the next 10 cars that come by, the make, the year, whatever. So, and my mother didn't have any other names to use except she did use those names. She had a brother Arthur and a brother Milton, and she named those kids anyhow. Then when my father came home, we moved to Brooklyn. My grandparents moved to Brooklyn. And anyhow, and my kid brother was born eventually. My mother was a sick lady,
What was she sick with?
terrible. She had high blood pressure. And she only lived to 50. She had a stroke. That was it. She was a good mother, and she was a very good-natured lady. She used to have my father's nieces live with her. This Dorothy, the deaf one, she had won a scholarship to Gaudet College, I guess. She had a mastoid operation when she was maybe 12, and she lost her hearing. And she never got along with her stepmother and didn't really know it wasn't her mother. He had a few other children with his second wife.
So you were living with your grandparents and your mother until your father came home, and then you guys lived on your own or with your grandparents
Yeah.
again?
Then we went to live on our own.
And then what did your
My
dad...
father went into the children's dress business. He used to travel on the road.
And then you were close with all your family and your uncles and everything?
We what?
You were close with your whole family? You were close with your uncles and all?
Yeah.
What did they used to call you?
Me?
Yeah.
What they used to call me.
Didn't you have a big white
I used
outfit?
to have these big white Angora hats that my mother made. Snowball. Snowball is what they called me.
Yeah. What happened when you were...
Actually, they took me to one of the Macy's first Thanksgiving Day parade.
How old were you?
3. And one of my uncle's friends lived in a house on the route, you know.
What happened when you were 3 years old? Didn't you go to the hospital?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me that story.
I had something with swollen glands. I used to...
Tonsillitis?
my mother would take me to this doctor, and he would pierce it or something. And then I had a appendix, burst appendix, I guess. And so my uncles went to shul to pray for me. And here I am. I was 4.
Yeah. Didn't they all come to the hospital and make a big deal about you or something?
What's that?
Didn't you say they all came to the hospital and made a big deal about
I
you?
think they prayed for me, yeah.
Uh-huh. Then what happened?
I got better.
And then what happened after 4
Then we
years
moved
old?
again. We moved a few times. We moved to a place where you lived on Union Street. And then we lived on Crown Street. And eventually, we lived in an apartment building on the same street with my grandmother. We lived in the corner on Montgomery and Brooklyn Avenue at 658 Montgomery Street.
Yeah. So then what happened with you in school and who were your friends?
Oh, I
when you
went
were
to
young?
PS 161. I used to walk to school with the landlady's daughter. They lived in the building too. That was my first friend, Mimi. And anyhow, then eventually we bought our own house. My mother didn't live to enjoy it too long.
Where was the house you bought?
Went to high school, went to Erasmus Hall High School. Used to pass Ebbets Field to get there. And that's where I met Renee Joseph at high school.
How old were you?
Oh, I was 13, 14. She lived with her father and her grandmother at the time, and the grandmother's family. She was very close to them.
And how did you do in high school?
What's that?
How did you do in high school?
I did well. That's how I got into Hunter. Otherwise,
tell
I
that story.
wouldn't have gone to college.
Tell the story about your high school.
Well, I told Julie when we went looking at schools, I said, you know, Julie, I didn't look at schools. I just went to the mailbox and waited for that letter. And once I got accepted at Hunter, that was it. That's where I was going.
What did
And
you
I met, I made a lot of friends there, and I had a good education, and I met Gladys and Bunny.
What did you study at Hunter?
Hunter? I did okay at Hunter.
What did you study?
Oh, business, which at the time was okay, but that's obsolete now.
So
And then I went to Columbia
why? How did that happen?
because I graduated from Hunter and got a job right away, and I worked for a patent attorney on Fifth Avenue, and I hated it. It was too routine. So I was complaining to my father. I said, oh, it's boring. He said, go to graduate school. You can get in, and I can afford it. It was like $5 a credit at the time. So I did. Went to Columbia. And I took my master's, and I had a part-time job there. And then I met him. I did pass the teacher's exam in New York, which was only given very infrequently. But I passed it, and I had a job subbing, which was lucky at the time. And that's the job I left when we got married.
Mm-hmm.
And in Boston, you couldn't teach if you were married.
Why?
Because that was the law. 1948, that was the law.
Uh-huh.
I couldn't teach anyhow because I was pregnant.
And who did you date much before you met Dad?
Yeah, I did, yeah. But I fell for him. And I spent that summer with Gladys. They invited me at their summer place. They were very nice to me. And she was engaged at the same time. And they went to Bermuda for their honeymoon, so that's why we did.
So then
And
what
they
happened?
had a rough time.
And tell me about your older brother and what he did.
Oh, well, he tried to get into med school. It was hard to get into med school. So he went to dental school in Manhattan. He went to NYU. I used to drive in with his friends and my grandfather. and my father. And eventually he got into medical school. And he was pretty smart.
Well, didn't he go to the University of Chicago when he was young?
No. Uh-uh.
Where did Artie go to school?
NYU.
Oh, really?
He couldn't get into a city school. He was very smart, but he went to parochial school, which
He went to a
is
Christian school?
Hebrew English.
Oh, okay.
And he went in for sports. He was Mr. Chubby, but he didn't like it. And anyhow, he got a job at a camp that my grandfather was a director at in Edgemere, Long Island. And he slimmed down. He got to be pretty good looking. And he went to NYU. And it was those grades who helped him get in to medical school.
Where did he go to medical school?
Chicago.
University of Chicago?
I don't think so.
Uh-huh.
I think it was Chicago Medical School.
Uh-huh.
And he used to type up all his notes and sell them, for spending money and that kind of stuff.
And then what about Joe?
Joe,
Yeah.
he was very smart. He was a genius.
Smarter than Artie?
Well, there was 10 years between them. We were all smart. But when he was a little kid, he was so smart that he used to hang around with me all the time, and because it was 6 years between us, and he would memorize all the poems that I had to memorize, and I would take him to school Christmas time, and he would recite them, and the teachers would go crazy, and he was gorgeous, big black eyes, and he was a beautiful little boy, and full of hell. And I practically brought him up when he was little.
How come? Because your mom wasn't there?
No, she wasn't well.
Uh-huh.
She had high blood pressure. She used to get terrible headaches. And so I can remember the neighbors that we lived in this apartment building saying, boy, she had lucky have that kid. She takes care of him. Anyhow, he was always very smart in school. And he did get into Roosevelt College in Chicago. I don't know if it still exists. But he went there. He almost graduated. I don't think he ever really graduated. But he lived near Artie, and Artie kind of looked after him. That's Artie was taken into the service, and, it was those war years. My mother got sick. She was bedridden.
Mm-hmm.
And she died.
How old were you when your mother started getting sick?
Oh, I was in college.
Oh, when your mother started getting sick?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, when my mother died, I was like 20.
And when she started getting sick, how old were you?
Yeah, in the teens. She'd go back and forth to Mount Sinai Hospital.
Uh-huh.
And she was partially paralyzed.
Uh-huh.
And we had a nurse at home. In those years, you could get, and she was very good. She took very good care of my mother. And people would, my father was quite popular, with his customers and whatever, and everybody would give him advice. And he'd say to them, when I need your advice, I'll ask for it. Said, take your daughter out of school and let her watch your wife. He said no. He wouldn't do that. He was very nice to me. So I even got an allowance.
Mm-hmm.
My uncles were not very nice to him.
Why?
Well, they took my father into the business, into this. It was a ladies' house coat business on Madison Avenue, 105 Madison Avenue. And they were kind of fresh. You know, Christmas time, they give him a crying towel. I remember those. He would be so hurt. And then my grandparents were elderly, younger than we are, a lot younger, and they go to Florida for the winter. And my grandfather did another will and included my father. He was supposed to be made a partner. The will was never found. So my mother was sick over it. It didn't do her blood pressure any good. She wouldn't say anything to them. It was sad. I remember what went on because I was grown. So they were always nice to me. I had no problem with it. I wasn't going to argue.
And then what happened after
But,
you got married?
Then my father remarried.
Uh-huh.
She was a bitch on wheels. Very wealthy woman. And he came up to visit us. And he opened a bank account at Pilgrim Trust Company. You remember that, honey?
Yep.
And then he had a visa to go to Israel because Israel had just become a country and independent, and he was not a religious man, but he was an ardent Zionist. He knew what it meant to need your own land. They're still fighting for it. So anyhow, he had a visa to Israel, and he died moving out on his wife.
Now he was going to move out on his wife and go to Israel?
Yep.
Because he didn't like living with her?
And my cousin Uriel was helping him, which was very sad. That's Joris's brother. He's gone now. But they all loved my father. Anyhow, she was nasty to think that he would move out on her. She was a very wealthy woman who really appreciated him in his intelligence, but she wasn't his type particularly.
What do you mean his intelligence? Did he read a lot, or what did he do?
Did he what?
Read a lot, or what did he do that showed his intelligence?
Did he what?
Did he read a lot? What you say his
Yeah,
intelligence?
he read a lot. He did. He was very well read. He read Hebrew books. He read English books.
What languages did he speak?
English and Russian. Yes. His brother went back to Russia and tried to get his sister and her family out. They weren't anxious to leave. They were scientists. They were a bright family. That was in the late 1930s.
They were scientists in Russia. What were they doing? Their name was Light?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And was their name Light when they were in Russia, or there was a
I
different
think
name?
so.
Yeah.
Licht.
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 Yeah.
Okay. And that's Russian
And
for light.
you know, there's a whole family. Yeah, they were probably wiped out. Who knows?
Yeah. But you don't know
But
what
they
part
were
of
persecuted.
you don't know what part of Russia.
Well, they were all cousins that probably have records of it.
Yeah.
There were two nieces from two brothers of my brothers who lived with us. One was this Dorothy, and one was married from our house. Ira, beautiful blonde, natural blonde. Really, she was beautiful, and she was a model.
From Russia.
And so,
yeah.
women's hats.
Yeah. And who was from Lithuania?
The part of Russia that my father was from became Lithuania.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, he brought his niece over here. He never went back. But his brother went to try to get people, whoever he could,
Do you know
cousins
what
or
city was in Lithuania? Which city?
live where?
The city? Do you know what city in Lithuania?
No, I don't know now. But
Yeah. Well, tell me more about your family and your mother's family and Uncle Arthur and the different things
Well,
that happened.
Arthur went into the artist material business,
Uh-huh.
and they told him that if he'd take Milton, who was the youngest brother, if he'd take him in with him, they would give him space in their loft. They had a loft, and because they had this business that my mother put them in, because she worked for what they called a cloak and suit house, just suits and coats. And so that's how that artist material started. I think he really went to work for somebody and copied him. And he was a big investor. He used to invest in the market, and if he'd lose, his brothers would help him. They were close at one time. Then Arthur died about the time you graduated from college. And then the company, they had a big place. They started on Long Island, and they had a big warehouse out there. So this artist material store kind of expanded, and Warren and Benji, his brother, those were Milton's sons, went into the business, ran the business with their wives, I guess. And Benji stepped out of there a while ago, and he told me he was sorry he didn't do it before. Apparently they weren't getting along too well, the two brothers. They have split up, and Lily, Milton's widow, remarried a very nice man who had never married, and he was a very well-to-do man. And I think he had an interest in El Al, didn't he, honey? I don't know, he used to travel back and forth a lot. Very nice man. We met them when we were in Florida. So they were friendly with, well, Lily's son, I don't know if you heard, was in a terrible accident, and he became a paraplegic.
But he's still been very successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's bright, and he's got a good sense of humor.
So everyone in the family, it sounds like almost everyone in the family was very, very smart, huh? Most people?
They were, including Peter.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where his brains went.
Yeah. Well, He's a little crazy.
And
Anything
but
about your family, about your kids being born, or trips that you and your
about
husband
who?
went on? You know, you have children. Anything about your children, or the houses you lived in, or anything like that that's interesting?
I can think of. Well, we love that one house. And Julie's very happy at her house, and Jane's happy with her house. And they seem to be doing all right.
Okay. Anything else you want to say?
Know that I've had a good life. I have no regrets. I married the man I wanted. And I think you kids have a lot of respect for us. That's what we've shown.
Mm-hmm.
And I would hope that you're always friends.
Mm-hmm.
After we're gone, that you still acknowledge one another, because I was not very happy with my brother Artie. He was very bright, but I was no dummy, and he never actually acknowledged me. As a matter of fact, my girlfriend Minna hates him.
Mm-hmm.
He
Anything else?
always thought that he was superior to us. He was nice to Milton. Maybe if he'd liked Milton's wife, he might have been nice. Milton had 3 nice boys, and he had such a bitch of a life, just miserable.
Yeah.
Whether he was in an accident that caused it, I don't know, but he had a wonderful potential. And he was kind and good-natured and good-looking and sweet. You ask Jane sometimes. She spent some time with him in New York.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very nice person. And now, if they called tomorrow and said he died, it'd be no loss.
Yeah.
Because I would go for a number of years. I'd go out. I had nothing to do with Daddy. It was he and me.
Yeah.
And when I really got to meet Dale, and we got to be friends, she was a very nice person.
Yeah.
So some of her being aloof, I blame on her husband.
Yeah.
But whatever. In later years, maybe he was.
Well, is there anything that happened when you were kids that drove you and Artie apart? Can you think of any?
Well, the one son is very nice.
Mm-hmm.
I met him when my brother was sick.
Yeah.
I was out there. He's a very nice person. Teddy.
Yeah.
He's a hand surgeon.
Yeah.
And he has 2 daughters. There's nobody to carry on the name.
Yeah.
I think he regretted that. He worshipped his father.
Mm-hmm.
And because he was born, they had another son. Their first child was handicapped, and he died as a youngster. So there were 2 girls, and I did try being friendly. Amy used to come to the house a lot when she lived in Boston with her husband. And Donna.
Richard Lang.
Huh?
Richard Lang.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're divorced.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got also a couple of very bright boys and a girl who went to all the best schools.
What about her sister? Did her sister have kids?
Amy has a little girl.
No, her sister. Amy has a sister.
Yeah, Donna.
Yeah. Did she have kids?
She has one daughter.
Does she still live in New York?
Not New York. It's not part of New York City. I think it's considered the island.
Yeah.
I have the address. But I started getting friendly with her, and then I sent her gifts for the little girl and some handmade things and a couple of things for my mother. And she was a little bit snooty. She's a school teacher. Maybe she was too busy.
Yeah.
But Dale said to me, "Oh, Cheryl, don't pay attention to Donna. That's the way she is."
Yeah.
Donna Donovan, her name is.
Uh-huh. So she's not Jewish.
So I'm glad she's married.
Uh-huh.
And I don't bother anymore.
Okay. Anything else?
Yes, our life here
Oh, okay.
is completely different.
Well, hold on a second. I gotta put the mic. You can go.
When we lived in Medford, we had a lot of friends. We had a lot of get-togethers and a lot of parties at different houses, but just about all of them are gone. But here, living here in Linden Ponds, we've made new friends. It filled in the spare time that we would have nothing else to do. So here they have activities. You can get involved in anything you like from what they present, and they're all friendly here. And we do have a specific group of friends that we have dinner with on occasion, and
So one of them has a birthday tonight.
and we're invited to their birthday parties, and so it's been a much more fulfilling life here than if we were back in the house, just the two of us. We'd sit around with not too much to do. Here we get to do things, play cards, and Mom was taking lessons and doing sewing and knitting, and so we get to express ourselves much more here, which helps because it's not nice to be alone. But fortunately, we have each other. But you like to have more than that. You like to have other friends. So I get to play poker, which isn't much of a money game, but it's a friendly game. So you get to see fellows and talk to things about them. And because of Renee, we met all these other women who are widows, and they like to be friendly. And that's so.
But Julie said, "Mom, not too friendly."
So
She
it's worked
said,
out. It's
"Just
worked out
watch
better.
out for him. They
Yeah.
like him."
Yeah.
It's worked out well.
He still blushes.
Anything else? Okay.